Question 1. The efficiency study reveals that a critical software module, essential for the upcoming client demonstration, is experiencing unexpected performance degradation due to an unforeseen integration conflict. The development team has identified a potential workaround that could resolve the immediate performance issue, but it has not undergone the full regression testing cycle and may introduce subtle side effects that are not yet fully understood. The project deadline is rapidly approaching, and the client demonstration is a key milestone. What is the most professional and ethically sound approach to address this situation? Option A. Halt all further development on the module and inform the client that the demonstration will need to be postponed due to unforeseen technical challenges without offering specific details. Option B. Conduct a rapid, focused risk assessment of the workaround. Document its potential limitations and the plan for post-demonstration validation, and present this to key stakeholders for a collaborative decision on proceeding with the workaround for the demonstration, while also exploring alternative solutions. Option C. Immediately implement the workaround to ensure the module functions adequately for the demonstration, with a plan to conduct full regression testing and address any side effects post-demonstration. Option D. Proceed with the demonstration using the current, degraded module and verbally acknowledge the performance issue to the client during the demonstration, promising a fix in the next release. Correct answer is C. Immediately implement the workaround to ensure the module functions adequately for the demonstration, with a plan to conduct full regression testing and address any side effects post-demonstration. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in project management where a critical deliverable is at risk due to unforeseen technical issues. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need to meet project deadlines and client expectations with the imperative to deliver a high-quality, secure, and compliant product. Rushing a solution without proper validation could lead to significant technical debt, security vulnerabilities, and non-compliance with IBM's internal development standards, and potentially external regulatory requirements if the software is client-facing. The pressure to deliver quickly is often high, but ethical and professional obligations to quality and security must take precedence. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, risk-based response. This includes a thorough root cause analysis to understand the technical issue, followed by a collaborative discussion with stakeholders to assess the impact of the delay and explore alternative solutions that do not compromise quality or compliance. Documenting the issue, the proposed solutions, and the decision-making process is crucial for transparency and accountability. This aligns with IBM's commitment to delivering reliable and secure solutions, adhering to its internal quality assurance processes and any relevant industry standards or regulations that govern software development and data handling. It demonstrates professional integrity by prioritizing a robust and compliant outcome over a hasty, potentially flawed one. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately implementing a quick fix without understanding the root cause. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses essential quality assurance steps, potentially introducing new bugs or security vulnerabilities. It violates the principle of delivering a well-engineered product and could lead to significant rework, client dissatisfaction, and reputational damage for IBM. It also fails to address the underlying systemic issue that caused the problem in the first place. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the original timeline by simply omitting the problematic feature or functionality. This is ethically problematic as it misrepresents the delivered product's capabilities to the client or stakeholders. It also fails to uphold the commitment to delivering a complete and functional solution, potentially leading to unmet business needs and a loss of trust. This approach prioritizes expediency over completeness and honesty. A third incorrect approach is to unilaterally decide to extend the deadline without consulting stakeholders. While extending the deadline might seem like a way to ensure quality, doing so without proper communication and agreement is unprofessional. It undermines collaborative decision-making, can disrupt downstream dependencies, and may not be feasible from a business or contractual perspective. It demonstrates a lack of respect for the project's broader ecosystem and stakeholder alignment. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should follow a structured problem-solving framework. This typically involves 1. Problem identification and assessment. Clearly define the issue and its potential impact. 2. Root cause analysis. Investigate the underlying reasons for the problem. 3. Solution generation. Brainstorm potential solutions, considering technical feasibility, quality, security, and compliance. 4. Stakeholder consultation. Discuss the problem and potential solutions with relevant parties, e.g., project managers, clients, technical leads to gather input and gain consensus. 5. Risk assessment. Evaluate the risks associated with each proposed solution. 6. Decision-making. Select the best course of action based on the analysis and consultation. 7. Implementation and monitoring. Execute the chosen solution and track its effectiveness. 8. Documentation. Record all steps, decisions, and outcomes for future reference and accountability. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and aligned with professional standards and organizational objectives. Question 2. Which approach would be most appropriate when a client expresses a strong desire for a high-risk, short-term investment strategy, but their stated financial goals and risk tolerance suggest a more conservative, long-term approach is suitable? Option A. Proceed with the client's preferred high-risk, short-term strategy, but minimize discussion of the potential risks involved to avoid alarming the client. Option B. Dismiss the client's stated preference for a high-risk strategy and unilaterally select a conservative, long-term investment plan without further discussion. Option C. Immediately implement the client's preferred high-risk, short-term investment strategy as requested, prioritizing client autonomy above all else. Option D. Conduct a detailed fact-finding process to understand the client's full financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term objectives, and then recommend a diversified portfolio that aligns with their assessed suitability, explaining the rationale clearly. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed fact-finding process to understand the client's full financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term objectives, and then recommend a diversified portfolio that aligns with their assessed suitability, explaining the rationale clearly. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in client advisory roles where a client's stated preference for a particular investment strategy conflicts with their stated risk tolerance and financial goals. The professional must navigate this discrepancy while adhering to regulatory obligations and ethical duties. The challenge lies in balancing client autonomy with the fiduciary responsibility to provide advice that is suitable and in the client's best interest, avoiding potential conflicts of interest or misrepresentation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough understanding of the client's complete financial picture and objectives before recommending any course of action. This involves a detailed fact-finding process that goes beyond the initial stated preference. By engaging in a deeper conversation about risk tolerance, time horizon, and overall financial goals, the professional can identify potential misalignments. Recommending a diversified portfolio that aligns with the client's risk profile, even if it differs from their initial stated preference, demonstrates adherence to the principle of suitability, a core regulatory and ethical requirement. This approach ensures that advice is personalized, responsible, and designed to achieve the client's long-term financial well-being, thereby fulfilling the duty of care. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately implementing the client's stated preference for the high-risk, short-term strategy without further investigation. This fails to uphold the duty of suitability. It prioritizes the client's potentially uninformed or emotionally driven request over a professional assessment of what is truly in their best financial interest, potentially exposing them to undue risk and violating regulatory guidelines that mandate advice be appropriate to the client's circumstances. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's stated preference outright and unilaterally impose a different strategy without adequate explanation or client buy-in. While the intention might be to protect the client, this approach undermines client autonomy and can damage the professional relationship. It also fails to adequately explore the client's underlying motivations for their initial preference, which might reveal valuable insights into their financial understanding or concerns. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with the client's stated preference while downplaying the associated risks. This constitutes a form of misrepresentation or omission of material facts. It fails to provide the client with a clear and accurate understanding of the potential downsides of their chosen strategy, thereby preventing them from making a truly informed decision and violating ethical standards of transparency and honesty. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with comprehensive client discovery. This involves active listening, probing questions, and a thorough assessment of financial situation, risk tolerance, investment objectives, and time horizon. Once a complete picture is formed, the professional should then evaluate various investment strategies against these parameters, identifying those that are suitable and aligned with the client's best interests. Any discrepancies between the client's stated preferences and their suitability profile must be addressed through clear communication, education, and collaborative decision-making, ensuring the client understands the rationale behind the recommendations and feels empowered in the process. Question 3. The review process indicates that a business unit is requesting access to a large dataset containing candidate information, including performance metrics from previous assessments, for the purpose of developing a new predictive model to identify high-potential hires. However, the proposed use of this data has not been formally assessed against the IBM hiring assessment tests governing data protection and privacy regulations. What is the most appropriate immediate next step for the data governance team? Option A. Initiate a formal data protection impact assessment and consult with the legal and compliance departments to ensure all regulatory requirements are met before any data access or processing occurs. Option B. Grant the business unit access to the data, assuming that the data was collected for legitimate business purposes and that its use for model development is implicitly permitted. Option C. Inform the business unit that their request cannot be fulfilled due to potential privacy risks and suggest they explore alternative, less sensitive data sources. Option D. Advise the business unit to proceed with their analysis using anonymized data only without a formal assessment to mitigate immediate privacy concerns. Correct answer is A. Initiate a formal data protection impact assessment and consult with the legal and compliance departments to ensure all regulatory requirements are met before any data access or processing occurs. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in data privacy and compliance where a business unit's operational needs clash with regulatory requirements. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate benefits of data utilization for business growth against the potential risks of non-compliance, which can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The need for swift decision-making under pressure, without compromising ethical standards or legal obligations, makes this situation professionally demanding. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory framework before making any decisions. This involves consulting with the legal and compliance teams to interpret the specific requirements of the IBM hiring assessment tests governing regulations, assuming a U.S. jurisdiction for this example, focusing on principles akin to GDPR or CCPA without explicit mention of those specific laws, but adhering to the spirit of data protection. This ensures that any action taken is legally sound and ethically responsible, safeguarding both the company and individuals whose data is involved. It reflects a proactive and risk-averse strategy that aligns with the principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and accountability. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the data integration without further consultation. This is a direct violation of data protection principles and potentially specific regulations that mandate consent, transparency, or impact assessments before processing personal data. It demonstrates a disregard for legal obligations and a failure to exercise due diligence, exposing the company to significant regulatory penalties and legal action. Another incorrect approach is to immediately reject the business unit's request without exploring potential compliance solutions. A caution is important. An outright refusal without investigation can stifle innovation and hinder legitimate business objectives. This approach fails to demonstrate a commitment to finding workable solutions within the regulatory boundaries and can lead to internal friction and missed opportunities. It lacks the collaborative problem-solving expected of a professional. A third incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice or assumptions about data privacy. This is highly risky as it bypasses formal legal and compliance channels, which are equipped to provide definitive interpretations of complex regulations. Such an approach can lead to misinterpretations, unintentional noncompliance, and a false sense of security, ultimately resulting in severe consequences. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, clearly identify the core issue and the potential risks involved. Second, consult the relevant internal experts, legal, compliance, data privacy officers, to understand the applicable regulations and guidelines. Third, gather all necessary information from the business unit to fully grasp their request and its implications. Fourth, evaluate different courses of action against the regulatory framework and ethical considerations, seeking to find solutions that are both compliant and achieve business objectives where possible. Finally, document the decision-making process and the rationale behind the chosen course of action. Question 4. The analysis reveals that a financial advisor, bound by UK regulatory frameworks, is assisting a long-standing client with a complex investment strategy. During a consultation, the advisor learns of a significant, non-public detail about the client's business that is highly relevant to a potential investment opportunity being explored by a new prospective client. The advisor believes that sharing this detail, without explicit consent from the existing client, could significantly benefit the new prospect and expedite their decision-making process. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor? Option A. Inform the new prospective client that a relevant detail exists but refrain from disclosing it, suggesting they conduct their own independent research. Option B. Share the information with the new prospective client, as it is in their best interest and the existing client is unlikely to be negatively impacted. Option C. Obtain explicit, informed consent from the existing client before sharing any information with the new prospective client. Option D. Refuse to engage with the new prospective client to avoid any potential breach of confidentiality or conflict of interest. Correct answer is C. Obtain explicit, informed consent from the existing client before sharing any information with the new prospective client. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical obligation to maintain client confidentiality and the potential for conflicts of interest, particularly within the context of financial advisory services governed by the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) handbook in the UK. The core difficulty lies in balancing the duty to act in the best interests of one client with the potential to inadvertently harm another, or to breach confidentiality, by leveraging information gained from one relationship to benefit another. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing duties without compromising professional integrity or regulatory compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the client's explicit instructions and upholds the principle of confidentiality as mandated by the FCA's Conduct of Business Sourcebook, COBS, and general ethical principles of the financial services industry. By seeking explicit consent before disclosing any information, even if seemingly innocuous, the advisor demonstrates respect for client autonomy and adheres to the stringent data protection and privacy requirements. This proactive communication prevents potential breaches and reinforces trust, which is fundamental to client relationships and regulatory expectations. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the disclosure without explicit consent fails to recognize the fundamental right to privacy and confidentiality. This would constitute a breach of COBS, which emphasizes the need for clear communication and client agreement regarding the use and disclosure of their information. Furthermore, it could lead to a conflict of interest if the information shared inadvertently disadvantages the original client or creates an unfair advantage for the new client, violating the FCA's principles for businesses, specifically Principle 8, Customers' Interests, and Principle 9, Utmost Good Faith. Another incorrect approach, that of refusing to engage with the new client due to the perceived risk, while seemingly cautious, might not be the most professionally sound if the information from the first client is not directly and uniquely material to the second client's situation. A more nuanced approach would involve assessing the materiality of the information and its relevance, rather than a blanket refusal, which could be seen as a failure to serve potential clients within regulatory bounds, provided no conflict or breach arises. However, in this specific scenario, the information is directly relevant, making the refusal to proceed without consent the only ethically and regulatorily compliant path. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of 1. Identifying all parties involved and their respective interests. 2. Determining the nature and materiality of the information in question. 3. Assessing potential conflicts of interest. 4. Reviewing relevant regulatory obligations, e.g., FCA Handbook GDPR. 5. Considering ethical principles, particularly confidentiality and acting in clients' best interests. 6. Seeking explicit, informed consent where disclosure is contemplated. 7. Documenting all decisions and communications. If any doubt remains, seeking guidance from compliance or legal departments is paramount. Question 5. Governance review demonstrates that a client has explicitly requested a significant allocation to a single, high-risk niche sector, citing a recent news article as their primary justification. The advisor has concerns that this concentration may not align with the client's stated long-term financial goals and risk tolerance, which were previously established. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor? Option A. Implement the client's requested allocation to the niche sector, but add a disclaimer to the client's file stating that the decision was made solely at the client's insistence. Option B. Inform the client that their request is not in their best interest and proceed with a diversified portfolio strategy that the advisor deems more appropriate, without further consultation on the client's specific request. Option C. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the specific reasons behind their strong preference for this sector. Explore their understanding of the associated risks and potential impact on their overall portfolio diversification, and present alternative strategies that might achieve similar objectives with a more balanced risk profile. Option D. Immediately execute the client's requested allocation to the niche sector, as the client's instructions are paramount and must be followed without deviation. The correct answer is C. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the specific reasons behind their strong preference for this sector. Explore their understanding of the associated risks and potential impact on their overall portfolio diversification, and present alternative strategies that might achieve similar objectives with a more balanced risk profile. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the potential for that preference to lead to suboptimal outcomes or even regulatory noncompliance. The advisor must navigate the delicate balance of respecting client autonomy while upholding their fiduciary duty and adhering to professional standards. The challenge lies in identifying when a client's instruction, though seemingly clear, might be based on incomplete information, misunderstanding, or a desire that is not in their best long-term interest, thereby requiring further investigation and counsel. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing a thorough understanding of the client's objectives and the underlying rationale for their request. This involves engaging in a detailed discussion to uncover the why behind the client's preference for a specific, potentially less diversified, investment. This aligns with regulatory requirements and ethical obligations to act in the client's best interest, which necessitates a comprehensive assessment of their risk tolerance, financial goals, and time horizon. By seeking to understand the client's motivations, the advisor can then provide tailored advice that addresses their needs effectively and compliantly, ensuring that any recommendations are suitable and justifiable. This proactive and client-centric approach is fundamental to building trust and fulfilling advisory responsibilities. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately implementing the client's request without further inquiry. This fails to meet the professional standard of care and potentially violates regulatory obligations to ensure suitability. It presumes the client's instruction is fully informed and in their best interest, which is a dangerous assumption. This could lead to a portfolio that is not aligned with the client's true risk profile or financial objectives, exposing them to undue risk or missed opportunities. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request outright and unilaterally impose a different strategy. This demonstrates a lack of respect for client autonomy and can damage the professional relationship. While the advisor may believe their alternative is superior, failing to understand and address the client's stated preference is unprofessional and may not align with the client's actual, albeit perhaps poorly articulated, needs. It bypasses the crucial step of client education and collaborative decision-making. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with the client's request, but to document the conversation extensively without actually probing for deeper understanding or offering alternative perspectives. While documentation is important, it should be a byproduct of a robust advisory process, not a substitute for it. Simply noting the client's instruction without attempting to understand its basis or offering informed guidance is a superficial engagement that does not fulfill the advisor's duty of care. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that begins with active listening and a genuine effort to understand the client's stated needs and underlying motivations. This should be followed by a comprehensive assessment of the client's financial situation, goals, and risk tolerance. Based on this understanding, the professional should then present suitable options, clearly explaining the benefits, risks, and implications of each, including the client's preferred option and any alternatives. The decision-making process should be collaborative, ensuring the client is empowered to make informed choices that align with their best interests and regulatory requirements. Question 6. System analysis indicates that a financial advisory firm is considering implementing a new artificial intelligence (AI) tool designed to generate personalized investment recommendations for clients. While the AI promises enhanced efficiency and client engagement, the firm's compliance department has raised concerns about potential regulatory implications, particularly regarding data privacy, algorithmic bias, and the firm's duty to provide suitable advice under the UK Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) framework. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firm to ensure regulatory compliance before fully deploying this AI tool? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the AI tool's functionality, data handling processes, and algorithmic logic, seeking expert legal and compliance advice to assess its adherence to FCA regulations, including suitability, data privacy, GDPR, and potential for bias before any client use. Option B. Rely on the firm's existing compliance policies for general investment advice, assuming they are sufficient to cover the use of AI-generated recommendations without specific adaptation or review. Option C. Proceed with the deployment of the AI tool immediately, as the vendor has assured it meets all relevant data protection and financial advice standards, and address any compliance issues that may arise post-implementation. Option D. Deploy the AI tool to a limited internal test group, and only seek external compliance review if significant issues are identified during this internal testing phase. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the deployment of the AI tool immediately, as the vendor has assured it meets all relevant data protection and financial advice standards, and address any compliance issues that may arise post-implementation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in regulatory compliance where a new technology, while offering potential business benefits, introduces novel risks that are not explicitly addressed by existing regulations. The challenge lies in balancing innovation with the imperative to maintain compliance and protect client interests, especially when the regulatory landscape is still evolving. The pressure to adopt new tools quickly can lead to overlooking potential compliance gaps. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and assessing the regulatory implications of the new AI tool before full deployment. This demonstrates a commitment to robust compliance by seeking expert advice, conducting thorough risk assessments, and engaging with relevant regulatory bodies or internal compliance teams. This proactive stance ensures that the tool is implemented in a manner that aligns with the spirit and letter of existing regulations, even if specific guidance for AI is nascent. It prioritizes client data protection, ethical consideration, and the integrity of financial advice, which are fundamental tenets of regulatory frameworks like those overseen by the FCA in the UK. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that prioritizes immediate deployment without a comprehensive regulatory review fails to uphold the duty of care owed to clients and the firm's regulatory obligations. This could lead to breaches of data privacy laws e.g., GDPR, misrepresentation of services, or inadequate risk management, all of which carry significant penalties and reputational damage. An approach that relies solely on the vendor's assurances, without independent verification, is negligent. Vendors may not fully understand the specific regulatory context of the firm's operations, or may downplay potential risks. This abdication of due diligence exposes the firm to regulatory scrutiny and potential enforcement actions. An approach that assumes existing regulations are sufficient without a specific assessment of how AI interacts with them is a dangerous assumption. Regulations are often principles-based, but their application to new technologies requires careful interpretation and often specific guidance. Failing to undertake this specific assessment risks misinterpreting regulatory requirements and inadvertently breaching them. Professional reasoning. professionals should adopt a risk-based, proactive approach to regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding the business objective and the technology being considered. 2. Identifying potential regulatory touchpoints and risks associated with the technology. 3. Consulting with internal compliance, legal, and data protection officers. 4. Seeking external expertise if necessary, particularly for novel technologies. 5. Documenting the assessment process and mitigation strategies. 6. Engaging with regulators if there is ambiguity or a need for clarification. This systematic process ensures that innovation is pursued responsibly and within the bounds of regulatory requirements. Question 7. During the evaluation of a new project proposal from a long-standing client, a team member identifies that the client's requested method for data sharing involves transmitting sensitive customer information via unencrypted email. The team member is aware that this practice is not in line with current data protection regulations and company policy. Option A. Proceed with the client's requested method, as they are a valued client and the request is straightforward. Option B. Attempt to anonymize the data by removing obvious identifiers before sending it via email, assuming this will satisfy regulatory requirements. Option C. Acknowledge the client's request but do not respond further, hoping the client will forget about it or find another solution. Option D. Inform the client that their request cannot be fulfilled due to regulatory noncompliance, and propose an alternative secure data transfer method that aligns with data protection laws. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the client's requested method, as they are a valued client and the request is straightforward. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's explicit request and the regulatory obligation to ensure data privacy and security. The pressure to meet client expectations, especially from a long-standing relationship, can create a temptation to bypass established protocols. Navigating this requires a strong understanding of data protection laws and the ability to communicate complex regulatory requirements effectively to a client. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing regulatory compliance and client data security above immediate client satisfaction. It acknowledges the client's request, but immediately identifies the potential conflict with data privacy regulations. By proposing a secure, compliant alternative that still addresses the client's underlying need, it upholds ethical standards and legal obligations. This approach safeguards the organization from potential breaches, fines, and reputational damage, while also educating the client on responsible data handling. The commitment to finding a compliant solution reinforces trust and demonstrates a responsible partnership. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach fails by directly complying with the client's request without any consideration for regulatory implications. This represents a significant regulatory failure, as it likely violates data privacy laws by exposing sensitive information unnecessarily. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for client confidentiality and a lack of professional responsibility. Another incorrect approach involves attempting to anonymize the data without a clear understanding of what constitutes true anonymization under relevant regulations. This is a regulatory failure because incomplete or ineffective anonymization can still lead to re-identification, thus violating data protection principles. Ethically, it is a misrepresentation of security measures and could mislead the client into believing their data is more protected than it actually is. A third incorrect approach, which involves delaying the response to the client indefinitely, is also professionally unacceptable. While it avoids an immediate breach, it fails to address the client's needs and can damage the client relationship. More importantly, it represents a failure to proactively manage regulatory risk and a lack of commitment to finding compliant solutions, which is a core professional responsibility. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that begins with understanding the client's objective. Subsequently, they must identify all potential regulatory and ethical implications of fulfilling that objective directly. If a conflict exists, the next step is to explore alternative, compliant methods that achieve the client's underlying goal. Clear, transparent communication with the client about these constraints and proposed solutions is paramount. This process ensures that both client needs and regulatory obligations are met responsibly. Question 8. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new AI-powered tool for initial candidate screening could significantly reduce recruitment processing time and associated costs. However, concerns have been raised about the tool's potential biases and its adherence to fair assessment principles, which are critical for maintaining the integrity of the IBM hiring assessment test process. Which of the following represents the most prudent and professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the AI tool's algorithms and data sources with legal and compliance experts to identify and mitigate any potential biases or regulatory risks before deployment, even if this delays the immediate cost savings. Option B. Proceed with the implementation of the AI tool immediately to capture the cost savings, assuming that any potential compliance issues can be addressed retroactively if they arise. Option C. Delay the implementation indefinitely due to the perceived complexity of ensuring compliance, opting to continue with the existing, albeit less efficient, manual screening process. Option D. Implement the AI tool and rely on the vendor's assurances of compliance without conducting independent verification to expedite the adoption process. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the implementation of the AI tool immediately to capture the cost savings, assuming that any potential compliance issues can be addressed retroactively if they arise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial benefits of a new technology against potential, less quantifiable risks related to regulatory compliance and data integrity. The pressure to innovate and gain a competitive edge can sometimes overshadow the meticulous adherence to established guidelines, creating a tension between progress and prudence. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the pursuit of efficiency does not lead to a breach of regulatory obligations or compromise the trustworthiness of the data processed. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding and proactive mitigation of regulatory risks before full implementation. This aligns with the principles of responsible innovation and robust compliance frameworks. Specifically, it demonstrates a commitment to adhering to the IBM hiring assessment test's implicit regulatory expectations regarding data handling, fairness, and transparency. By engaging legal and compliance teams early, the organization ensures that the technology's deployment is not only technically sound, but also legally defensible and ethically sound, safeguarding against potential penalties, reputational damage, and loss of candidate trust. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cost savings without adequate due diligence fails to acknowledge the potential for significant financial and reputational repercussions. This could lead to violations of data privacy regulations, if applicable to the assessment context, e.g., GDPR principles for candidate data, or principles of fairness and non-discrimination in hiring, which are often implicitly or explicitly regulated. Another incorrect approach, which relies on a superficial review of compliance documentation, risks overlooking nuanced requirements or emerging regulatory interpretations. This can result in unintentional noncompliance, where the organization believes it is compliant but has failed to meet the spirit or letter of the law. A third incorrect approach, which delays legal and compliance consultation until after implementation, is reactive rather than proactive. This significantly increases the risk of discovering noncompliance issues late in the process, leading to costly remediation, potential legal challenges, and a breakdown in the integrity of the hiring process. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This begins with identifying all potential regulatory touchpoints and compliance obligations relevant to the technology or process. Subsequently, a thorough evaluation of the technology's impact on these obligations should be conducted, involving all relevant stakeholders, including legal, compliance, IT, and business units. Prioritizing the mitigation of high-risk areas and seeking expert advice early in the decision-making cycle are crucial steps. Finally, establishing ongoing monitoring and review mechanisms ensures sustained compliance and adaptability to evolving regulatory landscapes. Question 9. Risk assessment procedures indicate that during a routine data processing task for a new client onboarding initiative, a subset of the data being processed appears to contain personally identifiable information, PI, that was not explicitly disclosed in the client contract or anticipated in the project scope. The project deadline is imminent, and the team is under pressure to complete the onboarding process. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. proceed with the data processing but attempt to quickly anonymize or delete the potentially sensitive data without informing management or legal counsel. Option B. Continue with the data processing as planned, assuming the data is not truly sensitive or that the risk is negligible, and address any potential issues after the project deadline. Option C. Immediately halt all data processing related to this client onboarding. Initiate an internal investigation to determine the nature and scope of the sensitive data, and consult with the legal and compliance departments before proceeding. Option D. Continue with the data processing and inform the client about the unexpected discovery of PII after the onboarding process is fully completed. The correct answer is C. Immediately halt all data processing related to this client onboarding. Initiate an internal investigation to determine the nature and scope of the sensitive data, and consult with the legal and compliance departments before proceeding. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for efficient data processing with the imperative of regulatory compliance, specifically concerning data privacy and security. The pressure to deliver a project on time, coupled with the discovery of potentially sensitive data, creates a conflict between business objectives and legal obligations. The professional must exercise sound judgment to navigate this situation without compromising either. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes immediate identification and containment of the risk. This involves halting the data processing, conducting a thorough investigation to understand the nature and scope of the sensitive data, and consulting with legal and compliance teams. This aligns with the principles of data protection regulations, which mandate proactive risk management, data minimization, and the secure handling of personal information. By pausing operations, the professional demonstrates a commitment to preventing potential data breaches and unauthorized access, thereby upholding ethical standards and regulatory requirements. This approach ensures that any subsequent data processing is conducted in a manner that is compliant and minimizes risk. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the data processing while attempting to address the issue later. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It demonstrates a disregard for data privacy laws, which often require immediate action upon discovering potential breaches or noncompliance. This approach risks unauthorized disclosure or misuse of sensitive data, leading to severe legal penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of trust. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the discovery and continue as planned, assuming the data is not truly sensitive or that the risk is negligible. This is a critical ethical lapse and a direct violation of due diligence requirements. It shows a lack of professional responsibility and a failure to adhere to the principles of risk management. Such inaction can lead to severe consequences if the data is indeed sensitive and a breach occurs. A third incorrect approach is to attempt to rectify the situation by deleting the data without proper documentation or consultation. While seemingly a quick fix, this can be problematic. It may violate data retention policies or audit trail requirements. Furthermore, it bypasses the necessary legal and compliance review, which might have dictated specific procedures for handling such data, including secure deletion or anonymization. This approach lacks transparency and proper governance. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, recognize and acknowledge the potential risk. Second, immediately halt any activities that could exacerbate the risk. Third, initiate an investigation to gather facts. Fourth, consult with relevant internal stakeholders, such as legal, compliance, and IT security. Fifth, develop and implement a remediation plan based on the findings and expert advice. This systematic approach ensures that all regulatory obligations are met, ethical considerations are addressed, and the organization's interests are protected. Question 10. Regulatory review indicates that the IBM hiring assessment test is designed to objectively evaluate candidate aptitude and potential. A candidate's representative inquires about the possibility of tailoring their responses to ensure a specific role outcome. Which of the following represents the most appropriate professional response, adhering strictly to the assessment's regulatory framework and ethical guidelines? Option A suggests that the assessment is merely a formality and that the candidate's existing experience will be the primary determinant of their success, regardless of assessment performance. Option B advise the candidate on how to strategically answer questions to align with the requirements of their desired role, thereby increasing their chances of selection. Option C Offer to provide a pre-assessment practice session where specific question types and ideal response strategies can be reviewed to optimize performance. Option D. Explain that the assessment measures inherent capabilities and potential, and that specific outcomes cannot be guaranteed or influenced by response tailoring. The correct answer is D. Explain that the assessment measures inherent capabilities and potential, and that specific outcomes cannot be guaranteed or influenced by response tailoring. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's desire for a specific outcome and the regulatory obligation to provide objective, unbiased advice. The challenge lies in navigating client expectations while upholding professional integrity and adhering to the strict guidelines of the IBM hiring assessment test regulatory framework, which emphasizes fair and transparent assessment processes. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential for misinterpretation of assessment results and the ethical imperative to avoid any action that could be construed as influencing the assessment unfairly. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves clearly communicating the limitations of the assessment tool and the inability to predict specific outcomes. This aligns with the regulatory framework's emphasis on objective evaluation and the ethical principle of honesty. By explaining that the assessment measures aptitude and potential rather than guaranteeing a specific role or outcome, the professional upholds transparency and manages client expectations responsibly. This approach avoids any suggestion of undue influence or preferential treatment, thereby safeguarding the integrity of the hiring process. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves suggesting that the assessment results can be interpreted to favor a particular outcome. This is a regulatory failure because it implies manipulation of data or a subjective interpretation that deviates from the objective scoring mechanisms mandated by the assessment framework. Ethically, it is deceptive and undermines the fairness of the assessment. Another incorrect approach is to offer to coach the candidate specifically on how to answer questions to achieve a desired result. This constitutes a significant regulatory breach as it directly attempts to influence the assessment's outcome, violating the principle of assessing genuine aptitude. It is also an ethical failure, as it creates an unfair advantage and compromises the integrity of the hiring process. A third incorrect approach is to downplay the significance of the assessment results and assure the candidate that their existing experience will be the sole deciding factor. While experience is important, this approach dismisses the purpose of the assessment itself, which is designed to be a component of the evaluation. This can be seen as a regulatory failure by not respecting the established assessment protocol and an ethical failure by providing misleading reassurance that could lead to a false sense of security. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, objectivity, and adherence to established protocols. When faced with client expectations that may conflict with these principles, the first step is to clearly understand the regulatory requirements and ethical guidelines governing the situation. Next, communicate these limitations and requirements to the client in a clear and unambiguous manner. If the client's request remains problematic, seek guidance from supervisors or relevant compliance departments. The ultimate goal is to ensure that all actions taken are defensible under the relevant regulatory framework and uphold the highest ethical standards. Question 11. The evaluation methodology shows a new hire responsible for updating the company's customer data handling procedures to align with recent regulatory changes. They have received a high-level overview of the new requirements, but are unsure about the specific interpretation of certain clauses related to consent management. What is the most appropriate initial step to ensure compliant implementation? Option A. Rely on industry best practices and common interpretations found in online forums and unofficial guides to inform the implementation. Option B. Implement the changes in a way that prioritizes business efficiency, with a plan to address any potential compliance issues if they arise later. Option C. Immediately consult the company's legal counsel or designated data protection officer for clarification on the specific clauses and guidance on compliant interpretation. Option D. Proceed with the implementation based on their understanding of the general principles of data privacy, assuming the interpretation is broadly similar to previous regulations. The correct answer is D. proceed with the implementation based on their understanding of the general principles of data privacy, assuming the interpretation is broadly similar to previous regulations. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows a scenario where a new employee is tasked with implementing a data privacy policy. This is professionally challenging because it requires not only understanding the policy's technical requirements, but also navigating potential conflicts between business objectives and regulatory mandates. The employee must exercise careful judgment to ensure compliance without unduly hindering operational efficiency. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory framework, such as the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, if the exam jurisdiction is the EU, or relevant U.S. federal and state privacy laws if the jurisdiction is the U.S. This involves consulting official guidance, seeking clarification from legal or compliance departments, and conducting a risk assessment to identify potential areas of non-compliance. This proactive and informed approach ensures that the implementation is legally sound and ethically responsible, minimizing the risk of penalties and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on meeting immediate business needs without considering regulatory implications would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of due diligence and a disregard for legal obligations, potentially leading to data breaches, fines, and loss of customer trust. Another incorrect approach that involves making assumptions about regulatory requirements without verification is equally problematic. This demonstrates a lack of professionalism and a failure to adhere to the principle of know your obligations. Such assumptions can lead to significant compliance gaps. A third incorrect approach that involves delaying implementation due to perceived complexity without seeking appropriate resources or guidance is also unacceptable. This passive stance can result in ongoing noncompliance and increased risk over time. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the relevant regulatory landscape. This is followed by a comprehensive assessment of the proposed actions against these regulations. Seeking expert advice from legal, compliance, or privacy officers is crucial when uncertainties arise. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale behind chosen implementation strategies provides a clear audit trail and demonstrates a commitment to compliance. Question 12. The control framework reveals that a new AI-powered algorithmic trading system has been developed internally, designed to execute trades at significantly higher speeds than existing systems. Before full integration into live trading, what is the most prudent regulatory compliance approach? Option A. Rely solely on the vendor's internal testing reports and assurances regarding the AI's compliance with all relevant financial regulations. Option B. Deploy the AI system in a limited capacity to a small group of trusted clients for initial feedback before wider rollout. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive pre-deployment risk assessment, including testing for data integrity, algorithmic bias, and potential market impact, with detailed documentation of findings and mitigation strategies. Option D. Proceed with immediate deployment to capitalize on the speed advantage, assuming the internal development process inherently ensures compliance. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive pre-deployment risk assessment, including testing for data integrity, algorithmic bias, and potential market impact, with detailed documentation of findings and mitigation strategies. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between rapid innovation and the need for robust regulatory compliance. The introduction of a new AI-driven trading algorithm, while promising efficiency gains, carries significant risks related to data integrity, algorithmic bias, and potential market manipulation. The firm's obligation is to ensure that any new technology deployed adheres strictly to the regulatory framework governing financial markets, specifically the principles of fairness, transparency, and market integrity. Careful judgment is required to balance the competitive advantage offered by the AI with the paramount importance of regulatory adherence. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, documented, and risk-based assessment before full deployment. This aligns with the principles of responsible innovation and proactive risk management mandated by regulatory bodies. Specifically, it demonstrates a commitment to understanding and mitigating potential harms, ensuring that the AI's decision-making processes are explainable and auditable, and that the system does not introduce unfair advantages or systemic risks. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining market confidence and avoiding regulatory sanctions. An incorrect approach that involves deploying the AI without comprehensive pre-launch testing and validation would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate the principle of due diligence, potentially exposing the firm and the market to unforeseen risks. It could lead to breaches of regulations concerning market conduct, data privacy, and algorithmic accountability. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on the vendor's assurances without independent verification, would fail to meet the firm's fiduciary responsibilities and could be seen as a dereliction of duty, as the ultimate responsibility for compliance rests with the deploying entity. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This includes identifying potential risks associated with the new technology, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and developing mitigation strategies. It requires cross-functional collaboration between technology, compliance, legal, and business units. Furthermore, it necessitates establishing clear governance structures, ongoing monitoring mechanisms, and a robust incident response plan. The decision to deploy should only be made after all identified risks have been adequately addressed and documented, and a clear audit trail of the assessment and approval process is maintained. Question 13. Implementation of a new, potentially significant risk identified late in a critical project phase requires a professional response. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation? Option A. Immediately implement a mitigation strategy based on initial assumptions to avoid project delays. Option B. Conduct a phased risk assessment, starting with defining the risk, assessing its potential impact and likelihood, and then developing appropriate mitigation strategies. Option C. Rely on the informal opinions of a few senior team members to gauge the risk severity. Option D. Document the risk and proceed with the project as planned, assuming it will not materialize. The correct answer is B. Conduct a phased risk assessment, starting with defining the risk, assessing its potential impact and likelihood, and then developing appropriate mitigation strategies. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in risk assessment where a newly identified, potentially significant risk emerges late in a project lifecycle. The professional pressure to maintain timelines and budgets can create a conflict with the imperative to thoroughly assess and mitigate new threats. The challenge lies in balancing the need for due diligence with the practical constraints of project management, ensuring that the assessment is robust enough to inform decision-making without causing undue delay or cost. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, phased risk assessment process that prioritizes understanding the potential impact and likelihood of the new risk. This aligns with best practices in risk management, which advocate for a systematic evaluation of identified risks. By first defining the risk, then assessing its potential impact and likelihood, and finally developing appropriate mitigation strategies, the team ensures that decisions are data-driven and proportionate to the threat. This methodical approach is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and compliance with internal governance frameworks and potentially external regulatory expectations for robust risk management, even if not explicitly mandated by a specific regulation in this context. It fosters a culture of proactive risk management rather than reactive problem-solving. Incorrect approaches analysis. Ignoring the risk entirely represents a severe failure in professional responsibility and risk management principles. It implies a disregard for potential negative consequences, which could lead to significant financial, reputational, or operational damage. This approach is ethically unsound, as it prioritizes expediency over safeguarding the project and the organization. Implementing a mitigation strategy without a proper assessment is also professionally unacceptable. It is akin to treating a symptom without diagnosing the disease. This can lead to ineffective or even counterproductive mitigation efforts, wasting resources and failing to address the root cause of the risk. It demonstrates a lack of analytical rigor and a failure to adhere to a structured risk management process. Relying solely on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few individuals without a systematic assessment introduces bias and subjectivity into the risk evaluation. This can lead to an inaccurate understanding of the risk's true nature, impact, and likelihood, undermining the credibility of the risk assessment and potentially leading to poor decision-making. It fails to meet the standards of objective and evidence-based risk assessment. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, acknowledge and document the newly identified risk. Second, initiate a rapid but thorough risk assessment, focusing on defining the risk, its potential impact, and its likelihood. This may involve consulting subject matter experts and gathering relevant data. Third, based on the assessment, determine the appropriate response, which could range from acceptance to mitigation, transfer, or avoidance. Fourth, communicate the findings and proposed actions to relevant stakeholders, including project management and senior leadership, to ensure alignment and secure necessary resources. This process ensures that risk management is integrated into project execution and that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with professional standards and organizational objectives. Question 14. Process analysis reveals that the risk assessment team is under significant pressure to deliver a preliminary risk assessment for a new product launch within a very tight deadline. The team is considering several approaches to meet this deadline. Which approach best aligns with regulatory expectations for a robust risk assessment process? Option A. Focus solely on risks that have historically caused significant losses, assuming that new risks are unlikely to emerge for a product of this nature. Option B. Perform a comprehensive risk identification and analysis, including scenario planning for emerging threats, and thoroughly document all identified risks, their potential impact, and proposed mitigation strategies, even if it requires a slight extension of the deadline. Option C. Rely primarily on anecdotal evidence and informal discussions with experienced personnel to identify potential risks without formal documentation. Option D. Conduct a high-level review of known risks based on similar past product launches, focusing on the most probable threats and documenting only key findings. The correct answer is D. Conduct a high-level review of known risks based on similar past product launches, focusing on the most probable threats and documenting only key findings. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient risk identification with the imperative to adhere to regulatory requirements for thoroughness and documentation. The pressure to deliver a quick assessment can lead to shortcuts that compromise the integrity of the risk management process, potentially exposing the firm to unmanaged risks and regulatory scrutiny. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the assessment, while timely, is also comprehensive and compliant. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the regulatory requirement for a systematic and documented risk assessment, identifying potential risks, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and then documenting these findings. The team is fulfilling its obligations under relevant financial regulations. Assuming a U.S. jurisdiction for this exam, this would align with principles found in SEC or FINRA guidelines regarding risk management and internal controls. This systematic process ensures that risks are not overlooked and provides a clear audit trail for regulators. It demonstrates a commitment to proactive risk management and adherence to established compliance frameworks. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach fails by prioritizing speed over comprehensiveness. This could lead to the omission of critical risks that are not immediately apparent, violating the regulatory expectation for a thorough risk identification process. Such an oversight could result in significant financial or reputational damage if an unassessed risk materializes. Ethically, it represents a dereliction of duty to adequately protect the firm and its stakeholders. Another incorrect approach is flawed because it relies solely on historical data, without considering emerging threats or changes in the business environment. Regulatory frameworks often mandate forward-looking risk assessments. Ignoring new or evolving risks, even if they haven't impacted the firm historically, is a failure to meet the standard of due diligence and can expose the firm to unforeseen vulnerabilities. This approach also lacks the proactive element expected in robust risk management. A third incorrect approach is problematic due to its lack of documentation. Regulatory bodies require clear and auditable records of risk assessments. Without proper documentation, it is impossible to demonstrate compliance, to track risk mitigation efforts, or to learn from past assessments. This absence of a documented process is a direct contravention of internal control requirements and regulatory expectations for transparency and accountability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment by first understanding the specific regulatory landscape applicable to their industry and jurisdiction. This involves identifying all mandated components of a risk assessment, such as risk identification, analysis, evaluation, and mitigation planning. The process should be iterative and dynamic, incorporating both historical data and forward-looking analysis. Crucially, all steps and findings must be meticulously documented to ensure transparency, auditability, and compliance. When faced with time constraints, professionals should communicate potential impacts on assessment quality to stakeholders and seek to adjust timelines or resources rather than compromising the integrity of the process. Question 15. Benchmark analysis indicates that a new software development project is facing significant time constraints. The project manager is considering how to approach the risk assessment phase. Which of the following approaches would best align with robust risk management principles and regulatory expectations for a project of this nature? Option A. Delegate the entire risk assessment process to the most junior member of the technical team, trusting their immediate understanding of the technology. Option B. Focus the risk assessment exclusively on identifying risks that could cause catastrophic failure, disregarding any risks with a lower potential impact. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that involves brainstorming potential risks with the entire project team, followed by an analysis of each risk's likelihood and potential impact to prioritize mitigation efforts. Option D. Rely primarily on historical risk data from similar past projects, assuming that the new project will encounter similar challenges. Correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that involves brainstorming potential risks with the entire project team, followed by an analysis of each risk's likelihood and potential impact to prioritize mitigation efforts. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for comprehensive risk assessment with the practical constraints of time and resources. The project team is under pressure to deliver, but overlooking potential risks can lead to significant financial losses, reputational damage, and regulatory noncompliance. Careful judgment is required to identify the most critical risks and allocate resources effectively for their mitigation. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured and systematic method for identifying, analyzing, and evaluating risks. This aligns with established risk management frameworks and regulatory expectations that mandate a proactive approach to risk. By focusing on the likelihood and impact of identified risks, the team can make informed decisions about which risks require immediate attention and which can be monitored. This systematic process ensures that all significant risks are considered and that mitigation efforts are proportionate to the potential harm. An incorrect approach that relies solely on historical data without considering new project-specific factors fails to acknowledge that past performance is not always indicative of future results. This can lead to a false sense of security and leave the project vulnerable to novel or emerging risks. Ethically, this approach could be seen as negligent if it leads to foreseeable harm. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on high-impact risks while ignoring low-impact but high-frequency risks overlooks the cumulative effect of smaller issues. While individually minor, a series of such events can significantly disrupt operations and erode profitability. This approach can also be seen as a failure to conduct a thorough risk assessment as required by professional standards. A third incorrect approach that delegates risk assessment entirely to junior staff without adequate oversight or expertise can result in superficial analysis and missed critical risks. This not only compromises the quality of the risk assessment, but also fails to develop the risk management capabilities within the team. It can be considered a failure of due diligence and professional responsibility. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the project's objectives and context. This is followed by a systematic risk identification process, considering both internal and external factors. Subsequently, risks should be analyzed for their likelihood and impact, leading to an evaluation of their significance. Finally, appropriate mitigation strategies should be developed and implemented, with ongoing monitoring and review. This iterative process ensures that risk management is an integral part of project execution. Question 16. The monitoring system demonstrates a statistically significant deviation in transaction patterns for a specific client account, deviating from their historical activity and industry benchmarks. Option A. Initiate a detailed investigation into the transaction data, cross-referencing with client communication logs and relevant market news to understand the context and potential drivers of the deviation. Option B. Immediately flag the account for potential fraud and freeze all associated transactions, pending a full review by the compliance department. Option C. Alert the client directly about the detected anomaly and request an explanation for their recent transaction activity. Option D. Classify the deviation as a minor anomaly and schedule it for review during the next routine system audit, assuming it is likely a data processing error. The correct answer is A. Initiate a detailed investigation into the transaction data, cross-referencing with client communication logs and relevant market news to understand the context and potential drivers of the deviation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for proactive risk identification with the potential for overreaction or misinterpretation of data. The monitoring system has flagged an anomaly, but its significance and the appropriate response are not immediately clear. Careful judgment is required to avoid unnecessary disruption while ensuring that genuine risks are addressed. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and evidence-based response. By initiating a deeper investigation into the anomaly, the professional is adhering to principles of due diligence and responsible risk management. This aligns with regulatory expectations that firms should have robust processes for identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks. Specifically, in the context of financial services, assuming this is the domain of the IBM hiring assessment test, which often involves such scenarios, regulatory frameworks like those overseen by the FCA in the UK or FINRA in the US mandate that firms establish and maintain effective systems and controls to identify and manage risks. A thorough investigation ensures that any potential breach of regulations, internal policies, or market integrity is properly understood and addressed, thereby protecting the firm and its clients. An incorrect approach that involves immediately escalating the anomaly without further analysis would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to wasted resources, unnecessary panic, and a loss of credibility for the monitoring system and the team responsible for it. It fails to demonstrate a reasoned and proportionate response, which is a cornerstone of effective risk management and regulatory compliance. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring the anomaly due to its perceived low probability of significant impact, would be a direct violation of the duty of care and could expose the firm to substantial regulatory penalties and reputational damage. This demonstrates a failure to proactively manage risks, which is a critical regulatory requirement. Ignoring a potential red flag, regardless of initial perceived impact, is a dereliction of duty. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, understand the nature of the anomaly and the data it is derived from. Second, assess the potential impact and likelihood of the anomaly representing a genuine risk. Third, determine the appropriate level of investigation and response based on this assessment. And finally, document all actions taken and the rationale behind them. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with regulatory and ethical obligations. Question 17. Investigation of the most appropriate method for evaluating potential operational disruptions within a financial institution, considering both the probability of occurrence and the severity of consequences. Option A. A review prioritizing risks that have occurred most frequently in the past, without considering the magnitude of their potential impact. Option B. A comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies potential risks, analyzes their likelihood and impact, and evaluates the overall risk level. Option C. An assessment that exclusively focuses on the potential financial losses associated with each identified risk, regardless of how likely the risk is to materialize. Option D. A decision to bypass the risk assessment process for operational disruptions due to the inherent difficulty in precisely quantifying their likelihood and impact. The correct answer is B. A comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies potential risks, analyzes their likelihood and impact, and evaluates the overall risk level. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in a financial services context, specifically within the regulatory framework of the IBM hiring assessment test, which implies adherence to general principles of risk management and ethical conduct applicable in such assessments. The challenge lies in identifying the most appropriate method for assessing the likelihood and impact of a potential operational risk event, which is crucial for effective risk mitigation and compliance. The need for careful judgment arises from the inherent uncertainty in predicting future events and quantifying their potential consequences. A robust risk assessment is foundational to a sound risk management program, ensuring that resources are allocated effectively to address the most significant threats. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic process of identifying potential risks, analyzing their likelihood and impact, and then evaluating the overall risk level. This aligns with established risk management frameworks and best practices, often implicitly or explicitly referenced in professional assessments. By considering both the probability of an event occurring and the severity of its consequences, more accurate and actionable understanding of the risk landscape is achieved. This allows for prioritized responses and the development of appropriate controls, thereby fulfilling the duty of care expected in financial services and demonstrating a commitment to regulatory compliance and sound business practice. This methodical approach is essential for demonstrating a comprehensive understanding of risk assessment principles. Incorrect approach is analysis. Focusing solely on the potential impact of a risk without considering its likelihood is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It leads to an incomplete and potentially misleading assessment, as low-impact but highly probable events could be overlooked, or high-impact but extremely rare events could consume disproportionate resources. This approach fails to provide a balanced view of risk and can result in misallocation of resources and inadequate preparedness. Prioritizing only the most frequently occurring risks, irrespective of their impact, also represents a failure. While frequency is a component of likelihood, it does not account for the severity of the consequences. A high-frequency, low-impact event might be less critical than a low-frequency, high-impact event. This narrow focus can lead to neglecting significant threats that, while infrequent, could have catastrophic consequences, thereby failing to meet the organization's duty to manage material risks effectively. Ignoring potential operational risks altogether due to the difficulty in quantifying them is a direct contravention of risk management principles and likely regulatory expectations. A failure to identify and assess risks, even those that are challenging to quantify, leaves the organization exposed and vulnerable. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for the proactive measures required to safeguard operations and client interests, which is a fundamental ethical and professional failing. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment by first understanding the specific context and the relevant regulatory expectations. This involves adopting a structured methodology that considers all relevant dimensions of risk, including likelihood, impact, and velocity. A critical step is to engage with subject matter experts and utilize available data, even if imperfect, to inform the assessment. When faced with uncertainty, employing a range of analytical techniques and scenario planning can help to build a more robust understanding. The decision-making process should prioritize transparency, documentation, and a clear rationale for the chosen approach, ensuring that the assessment is defensible and contributes to effective risk management strategies. Question 18. The review process indicates that a financial advisor has been approached by a long-standing client who is adamant about investing a significant portion of their portfolio in a highly speculative, illiquid alternative investment product. The client states they have researched this product extensively and are confident in its potential returns. Despite the advisor's initial reservations based on the client's moderate risk tolerance and short to medium-term financial goals, the advisor is concerned that this product does not align with the client's overall financial plan and may expose them to unacceptable levels of risk. Option A. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, documenting their insistence and understanding of the risks to maintain client satisfaction and autonomy. Option B. Immediately refuse the client's request, citing the product's speculative nature and illiquidity, and advise them to seek advice elsewhere if they insist on proceeding. Option C. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment, including a detailed review of the client's financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and knowledge, and then explain to the client why the proposed product is not suitable, offering alternative investments that better align with their profile. Option D. Investigate the product further to find any possible justification for the client's request, prioritizing the client's stated desire over the advisor's initial assessment of suitability. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, documenting their insistence and understanding of the risks to maintain client satisfaction and autonomy. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when dealing with potentially unsuitable investment products. The advisor must navigate the complexities of client suitability, regulatory requirements, and ethical obligations. Careful judgment is required to balance client autonomy with the imperative to protect the client from harm. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the client's best interests and adheres to regulatory mandates regarding suitability. By conducting a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and knowledge, the advisor can determine if the proposed product aligns with these factors. If it does not, the advisor has a duty to explain these concerns clearly to the client and recommend alternatives that are more appropriate. This aligns with the principles of fiduciary duty, which require acting with utmost good faith and loyalty, and regulatory frameworks that emphasize client protection and suitability. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the recommendation solely based on the client's insistence, without a proper suitability assessment, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could violate regulations requiring advisors to ensure investments are suitable for their clients, potentially leading to disciplinary action, fines, and reputational damage. Ethically, it breaches the duty of care and loyalty owed to the client, exposing them to undue risk. Another incorrect approach, such as dismissing the client's request outright without understanding the underlying reasons or offering alternatives, demonstrates a lack of client centricity and poor communication, potentially damaging the client relationship and failing to meet professional standards of service. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the client's request. Fully comprehend the client's stated objective and the reasoning behind their preference. 2. Conduct a comprehensive suitability assessment. Gather all necessary information about the client's financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and experience. 3. Evaluate the proposed product against suitability criteria. Objectively assess whether the product meets the client's identified needs and risk profile. 4. Communicate findings clearly and transparently. If the product is unsuitable, explain the reasons to the client in plain language, highlighting potential risks and drawbacks. 5. Propose suitable alternatives. Offer alternative investment options that better align with the client's profile and objectives. 6. Document the process. Maintain detailed records of all client interactions, assessments, recommendations, and decisions. 7. Seek guidance if necessary. If unsure, consult with compliance or senior management. Question 19. When evaluating potential operational disruptions for a new cloud-based service deployment, which approach to risk assessment is most effective in guiding resource allocation and mitigation strategies? Option A. Documenting every conceivable negative outcome, no matter how improbable or minor, to ensure a comprehensive list of all potential issues. Option B. Focusing primarily on risks that have occurred in similar past projects, disregarding novel or emerging threats. Option C. Relying on the intuition of senior management to identify the most critical risks without formal analysis. Option D. Systematically assessing each identified risk based on its likelihood of occurrence and potential impact on service availability and data integrity, then prioritizing those with the highest combined scores for immediate mitigation planning. The correct answer is D. Systematically assessing each identified risk based on its likelihood of occurrence and potential impact on service availability and data integrity, then prioritizing those with the highest combined scores for immediate mitigation planning. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of risk assessment beyond simple identification. The challenge lies in distinguishing between a potential risk and a significant, actionable risk that warrants immediate attention and resource allocation. A junior analyst might be tempted to flag every potential issue, leading to an overwhelming and ineffective risk register. Conversely, an overly dismissive approach could overlook critical vulnerabilities. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes risks based on their potential impact and likelihood, aligning with the principles of effective risk management. This systematic evaluation ensures that resources are focused on the most critical threats, thereby optimizing the organization's ability to mitigate potential harm and achieve its objectives. This aligns with general principles of good governance and operational efficiency, which are implicitly expected in professional settings, even without specific regulatory mandates for this exact scenario within the IBM hiring assessment test context. The focus is on proactive and strategic risk management. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on identifying every conceivable negative outcome, regardless of probability or impact, fails to provide actionable insights. This approach is inefficient and can lead to alert fatigue, where genuine threats are lost in a sea of minor possibilities. It lacks the strategic foresight required for effective risk management. Another incorrect approach that dismisses potential risks without a thorough assessment, based on assumptions or personal bias, represents a significant ethical and professional failure. This can lead to the overlooking of critical vulnerabilities, potentially exposing the organization to severe financial, reputational, or operational damage. Such an approach violates the duty of care expected of professionals to act in the best interest of their organization. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach to risk assessment. This includes 1. Risk identification, brainstorming potential risks. 2. Risk analysis, evaluating the likelihood and potential impact of each identified risk. 3. Risk evaluation, prioritizing risks based on the analysis. 4. Risk treatment, developing strategies to mitigate, transfer, accept, or avoid prioritized risks. 5. Risk monitoring and review, continuously assessing the effectiveness of risk treatments and identifying new risks. This framework ensures a comprehensive and objective assessment, moving beyond mere identification to strategic management. Question 20. Examination of the data shows a client has expressed a strong preference for a particular investment strategy that, based on your professional assessment, carries a significantly higher risk profile than is generally considered suitable for their stated financial goals and risk tolerance. The client is insistent on proceeding with this strategy, citing anecdotal evidence from a friend. What is the most appropriate professional course of action? Option A. Inform the client that their preferred strategy is too risky and refuse to proceed, without offering alternative solutions or further explanation. Option B. Conduct a thorough analysis of the client's financial situation and goals, explore the risks and benefits of their preferred strategy alongside suitable alternatives, and then present a clear, objective recommendation to the client, facilitating an informed decision. Option C. Politely decline to implement the client's preferred strategy and unilaterally implement an alternative strategy that you deem more appropriate, without further discussion. Option D. Proceed with the client's preferred investment strategy as requested, as their explicit instruction overrides any professional concerns about suitability. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough analysis of the client's financial situation and goals, explore the risks and benefits of their preferred strategy alongside suitable alternatives, and then present a clear, objective recommendation to the client, facilitating an informed decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preferences and the potential for those preferences to lead to suboptimal or even detrimental outcomes, especially when viewed through the lens of a fiduciary duty. The challenge lies in balancing client autonomy with the professional's obligation to act in the client's best interest, guided by regulatory frameworks and ethical principles. Careful judgment is required to navigate this delicate balance without overstepping boundaries or failing in professional responsibilities. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, objective assessment of the client's situation and goals, aligning with the regulatory expectation of providing advice that is suitable and in the client's best interest. This involves understanding the underlying reasons for the client's stated preference, exploring alternative solutions, and clearly communicating the potential risks and benefits of each. This aligns with the principles of informed consent and client-centric advice, ensuring that decisions are made with a complete understanding of the implications, thereby fulfilling fiduciary duties and adhering to regulatory guidelines that mandate suitability and diligence. An incorrect approach that solely adheres to the client's initial, potentially ill-informed, request without further investigation would represent a failure to exercise professional judgment and due diligence. This could lead to a breach of fiduciary duty, as the professional would not have acted to ensure the client's best interests were met. It also risks violating regulatory requirements that mandate suitability assessments and the provision of advice that is appropriate for the client's circumstances and objectives. Another incorrect approach, that of unilaterally overriding the client's wishes based on the professional's own assumptions about what is best without proper consultation and explanation, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of respect for client autonomy and can erode trust. While the professional may have a strong conviction about the superior outcome of an alternative, the regulatory and ethical framework typically requires a process of education and persuasion, not dictation. This approach could lead to complaints, regulatory scrutiny, and damage to the professional's reputation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the client's stated objective and the rationale behind it. 2. Conduct a comprehensive assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and broader goals. 3. Objectively evaluate the client's stated preference against the assessment and explore alternative strategies. 4. Clearly and transparently communicate the findings, including the pros and cons of all viable options, to the client. 5. Guide the client towards an informed decision, respecting their ultimate authority while ensuring they have all necessary information. 6. Document the entire process, including discussions and the client's final decision.